April 8th, 1941. A British bomber flew through the darkness over occupied Belgium. But the crew wasn't dropping bombs that night. They were dropping something the Germans would never expect. Homing pigeons. Dozens of them, each in a small container with a tiny parachute attached. Inside each container was something even stranger. A questionnaire, instructions in French and Dutch, a pencil, sheets of rice paper thin as tissue, and a message asking whoever found these birds to become a spy. This was Operation Columba, and it would become one of the most remarkable intelligence operations you have never heard about. The story stayed classified for over 60 years. When the files were finally opened in 2007, historians discovered something extraordinary. Between 1941 and 1944, British intelligence dropped more than 16,000 pigeons across Nazi-occupied Europe, from Copenhagen and Denmark all the way down to Bordeaux in France. An arc of feathered spies, each one carrying a desperate plea for help. The man behind this operation worked in a basement in London. His name was Brian Melland, and before the conflict, he'd been a theatrical actor. His partner was a fellow named Sandy Sanderson, who'd served in the Highland Division during the First World Conflict. Together, these two men ran one of the most secret branches of British intelligence. It was called MI14, subsection D. Most people have heard of MI5 and MI6, but MI14, that was a mystery even to most people in the government. Their job was simple but nearly impossible. Find out what was happening under German occupation in Western Europe. Traditional spies were dying before they hit the ground. Parachuting agents into occupied territory was a death sentence. Radio operators were being tracked down and captured within days. The intelligence networks were a disaster. Things were so desperate that someone in the War Office actually suggested consulting a Yorkshire astrologer and water diviner known as Smoky Joe. That's how bad it had gotten. So Mellon and Sanderson came up with a plan that sounded absolutely insane. What if they didn't send human spies? What if they sent pigeons instead? Homing pigeons have an extraordinary ability. Release 100 miles from home, and it will find its way back. Scientists still aren't entirely sure how they do it. Some combination of magnetic fields, the position of the sun, maybe even smell. But it works. Give a pigeon from Kent a ride to Belgium, and that bird will fly straight home. The British had used pigeons in the first conflict, of course. But this was different. This wasn't about military communications. This was about reaching out to ordinary people living under occupation and asking them to risk everything. The questionnaire that dropped with each bird asked specific questions. Where are German troops stationed? What kind of insignia do they wear? What are the coastal defenses? How is morale among German soldiers? Can you hear the BBC radio broadcast clearly? And please, if you're willing to help us, fill this out and send the bird home. On the night of April 8th, 1941, the first pigeons were dropped. Then they waited. 2 days later, at 10:30 in the morning, the phone rang in that basement office in London. A pigeon fancier in Kent had found one of his birds back in its loft. Attached to its leg was a small canister. Inside was a message. Message number 1 had arrived. Operation Columba was working. The pigeons kept coming home through that spring and summer of 1941. Not many. Maybe 1 in 10 made it back. The rest were lost, or eaten, or found by people too frightened to send them. You have to understand what these folks were risking. If the Germans caught you with one of these birds, you'd be shot. No trial, no questions. Possession of a British pigeon was a capital offense. And the Germans knew about the operation. They'd started offering rewards to anyone who turned in these birds. They posted notices in town squares. They sent soldiers to shoot them out of the sky. But some people sent them anyway. The messages that came back were remarkable. Some were brief, just a few lines about troop movements or hearing BBC broadcasts. Some were funny in a dark way. One person wrote that there was no important news to report, so they were sending the pigeon back because at least it could be useful to the British. Another complained about the quality of the pencil, hard to write with apparently. Then, on July 12, 1941, something arrived that changed everything. Message number 37. When Melland opened the canister that morning, he couldn't believe what he was looking at. The writing was so small it was nearly invisible. He needed a magnifying glass to read it. The author had filled every millimeter of those rice paper sheets with tiny perfect handwriting. There were detailed maps, sketches of German positions, information about ammunition dumps, fuel depots, hidden artillery installations, a full damage assessment of recent RAF bombing raids on Brussels, details about a chateau near Bruges being used as a German communications hub. The message was 5,000 words long. It took 12 pages just to transcribe it. This wasn't just intelligence. This was gold. The message made its way through the War Office and landed on Winston Churchill's desk. The Prime Minister read it personally. Someone in occupied Belgium wasn't just willing to help. They were organized, skilled, and incredibly brave. The message was signed with a code name, Leopold Vindictive 200. The name was symbolic. Leopold referred to King Leopold III of Belgium, and Vindictive was a British warship that had been used in attacks on Belgian ports during the first conflict. The bow of that ship still sits in Ostend Harbor. Whoever these people were, they were patriots. The message asked for more pigeons and gave directions for where to drop them. It requested a response on the BBC radio broadcast to confirm receipt. On July 15th, just 3 days after the pigeon arrived, the BBC broadcast a coded message during its program to Belgium. Leopold Vindictive 200, the key fits the lock and the bird is in the lion's cage. Somewhere in Belgium, a group of ordinary people heard that message and knew their pigeon had made it home. They'd just done something extraordinary, and they'd also made themselves a target. The Belgian farmer who found that pigeon in July 1941 hid it in a sack of potatoes and took it to a family he trusted. The Debayes, 2 sisters and 3 brothers who ran a corner shop in the town of Lichtervelde. They were known as patriots, anti-German. One of the brothers, Michel, was a pigeon fancier. He knew what to do with the bird, but the Debayes didn't work alone. They called in help from 2 friends. The first was Hector Joy, a former soldier who loved military maps. The second was a Catholic priest named Father Joseph Raskin, and Father Raskin was exactly the right man for this job. During the first conflict, he'd worked as an intelligence gatherer, sketching German positions around the trenches. His artistic skills had helped Allied reconnaissance. After that conflict ended, he'd become a missionary and spent years in China. There he learned Chinese calligraphy and became extraordinarily skilled at tiny detailed writing and drawing. When the Germans invaded Belgium, Raskin had briefly served as chaplain to King Leopold. Now, under occupation, he was using all those skills for something new. Espionage. Father Raskin had another talent. He knew how to listen. As a priest, people talked to him. They told him things. He traveled around the countryside on church business, and nobody questioned a priest on a bicycle. He gathered information from his parishioners about German positions. The Debayle brothers drove along the coast and through neighborhoods around Bruges, taking notes. Joy gathered intelligence on a chateau occupied by German troops. And then Father Raskin went to work. He spread out those tiny sheets of rice paper. He picked up his fine-tipped pen, and through the night of July 11th, working by candlelight with a magnifying glass, he transferred everything they'd learned onto those sheets. Every millimeter was used. Maps, lists, damage reports, troop positions. It must have taken hours. His eyes must have ached. But by morning it was done. They folded the rice paper and tucked it into the tiny canister. They attached it to the pigeon's leg, and Michel Debayle released the bird into the sky. 36 hours later, that pigeon landed in England. Message number 37. The message that reached Churchill. The message that proved ordinary people under occupation were willing to fight back. But there was a problem. Before they sent the bird, the Leopold Vindictive group made a decision that broke every rule of espionage. They took photographs. With a holiday camera, they took pictures of themselves, the pigeon, and their message. They wanted proof of what they'd done. They wanted the British to know who they were. And when the BBC broadcast that coded acknowledgement, they broadcast the code name Leopold Vindictive across all of occupied Europe. The Germans were listening too. And now they were looking for a spy network called Leopold Vindictive. The hunt was on. The British tried desperately to get more pigeons to the Leopold Vindictive group. They tried multiple drops in the area around Lichtervelde, but somehow those pigeons never found their way to Raskin and his team. Maybe they landed in the wrong places. Maybe the Germans were intercepting them. The war in the skies had taken a strange turn. German soldiers were stationed along the English Channel with one specific job: shoot down British pigeons. They were trained snipers, given orders to kill any bird flying toward England. The British fought back in their own way. On the Isles of Scilly, at the southwestern tip of England, they stationed a special unit, 3 peregrine falcons, the fastest animals on Earth, capable of diving at over 200 miles per hour. Their job was to hunt down any German pigeons trying to reach the continent. 23 pigeons were killed by those falcons. It was a bizarre aerial battle. Hawks versus pigeons. Snipers shooting at birds. Both sides desperate to control this feathered intelligence network. Frustrated by the lack of new pigeons, Father Raskin made a dangerous decision. He reached out to other resistance groups to send information through different channels. Couriers, radio networks, ways to get intelligence back to England when the pigeons couldn't reach them. But some of those resistance groups had been infiltrated. The Abwehr, German counterintelligence, had informers everywhere. Someone betrayed them. On May 1st, 1942, the Gestapo came for Father Raskin. A man dressed as a beggar pointed him out. The priest was arrested. Soon after, they arrested Hector Joye and Arsène de Bailly, one of the brothers. The Leopold vindictive network was broken. The Germans had them. Father Raskin was thrown into prison to await trial. But even in prison, the other inmates said he never lost his spirit. He sang every night. He told stories about his years in China. He heard confessions from his fellow prisoners. A learned man, they said, uplifting, eloquent, an example to everyone around him. The trial was held on August 31st, 1943. The notorious People's Court, under its screaming president Roland Freisler. Freisler was known for humiliating defendants, yelling at them, treating them like criminals before they were even convicted. He'd moved his court to Papenburg in Lower Saxony because Berlin was being bombed too heavily. 3 members of Leopold Vindictive received prison sentences. 3 others, including Father Raskin, were sentenced to death. When asked if he had anything to say in his defense, Raskin spoke in German. "In conscience and before God, I have done my duty." On October 18, 1943, at 6:43 in the evening, Father Joseph Raskin was guillotined in Dortmund prison. Hector Joy and Arsène de Bailly died the same day. 3 ordinary people who'd found a pigeon in a field and decided to fight back. They paid with their lives. Operation Columba didn't stop with the tragedy of Leopold Vindictive. Between April 1941 and September 1944, the British dropped 16,554 pigeons over occupied Europe. Only about 10% made it back. That's roughly 1,600 birds. But those 1,600 pigeons brought back nearly 1,000 messages. Some were simple, some were detailed. Some changed the course of the conflict. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, pigeons played a crucial role. A bird named Gustav was the first to make it back to England that morning, covering the distance in about 5 hours. Attached to his leg was a message from a Reuters correspondent who'd been present at the first landing attempts. Some pigeons that returned from Normandy that day had human blood on their feathers. They'd been in the thick of the fighting. The price these birds paid was extraordinary. German soldiers shot them. Hawks attacked them. They flew through terrible weather, exhaustion slowly killing them. They were just birds doing what birds do, finding their way home. But they were carrying messages that saved lives. 32 pigeons received the Dickin Medal, the highest military decoration for animals. It's often called the Animals Victoria Cross. The medal bears the words, "For gallantry, and we also serve." Those 32 pigeons represented thousands of others that never made it home. And they represented the human beings who risked everything to send them. After the conflict ended, the story of Operation Columba was locked away, classified. The files sat in Britain's National Archives for over 60 years. It wasn't until 2007 that historians were finally allowed to look at the records. What they found was astonishing. In 2011, a dead pigeon was found in a chimney in Surrey. Still attached to its leg was a canister containing a coded message. Even the top code breakers at GCHQ, Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency, couldn't crack it. The message remains undeciphered to this day. Nobody knows who sent it or what it says. Just another mystery from Operation Columba. Another voice from the past that we'll never quite hear clearly. But we know this much: that pigeon was trying to get home. Someone had trusted it with a message. Someone had risked their life to send it, and it died trying to complete its mission, 70 years before anyone found it. Today, there's a statue in Aarschot, Belgium, honoring Father Joseph Raskin, a memorial to a priest who became a spy, to the Debailly family and Hector Joy and all the others who found those pigeons and made the bravest choice of their lives. They weren't soldiers. They weren't trained intelligence officers. They were shopkeepers and farmers and priests, ordinary people who decided that doing nothing wasn't an option. Operation Columba worked because of two things: pigeons that could find their way home across hundreds of miles of enemy territory, and human beings willing to risk execution to fill out a questionnaire. That combination, as unlikely as it sounds, helped turn the tide in Europe. The intelligence gathered me those birds informed bombing raids, helped plan the D-Day invasion, and gave the Allies a window into life under occupation. All because some theatrical actor in a basement in London had a crazy idea. And because when those pigeons landed in occupied territory, some people decided to trust them. The next time you see a pigeon in a city square, pecking at crumbs, maybe think about their ancestors. Some of them were heroes. Some of them saved lives. And some of them, like that bird in the Surrey chimney, died trying to deliver a message we'll never read. But we know they tried, and that's worth remembering.